In spite of its significance as a historical, strong national symbol conveying the triumph of democracy over military despotism and democratic tendencies, June 12, as the National Democracy Day, has in recent times lost that symbolic relevance owing to the entrenched anti-democratic machinations perpetrated by Nigerian politicians. Today, despite 23 years of continuous democratic rule, the politics of absurdity, characterized by widespread insecurity caused by ethno-religious bigotry, a thriving culture of corruption, and a free-falling economy has made many ask, what is the benefit of democracy? What is the benefit of Democracy Day to the ordinary man? Where is the hope heralded by the historically adjudged freest and fairest presidential election that this country conducted on June 12, 1993? What has translated into making the day as Democracy Day? Questions begin for answers. We have in the studio joining us to discuss this issue as member of the Daily Trust editorial board, Dr. Tope Pashua. Good morning, Mr. Pashua.
Morning.
And thank you for being with us. And we still have Ali M. Ali, the Deputy President of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, who will also be joining us to discuss or to ponder over these poses that we earlier posed. Let me start with you, Mr. Pashua. What is the significance of this Democracy Day, or what should be the significance of this day?
Well, thank you very much. I think what should be the significance should be whether democracy has delivered for the people, what they call democratic dividends and so on. Apart from the symbolism, which, we were trying to, at some point in time, solidify our democratic experience or transition back into democracy. Remember, for those who, we have a lot of young people these days, most of them angry, but unfortunately, most of them have no benefit of history, So, so the fact was that, okay, we were given our independence in 1960. The colonial power left us and said, look, guys, sort yourself out. But under 7 years, we were at war because at some point, some guys got it into their head and killed off the prime minister and some of his colleagues, and this was difficult to manage under 5 years or 6 years. This had happened, So what I meant was that we probably weren't mature enough to have been given that leeway to manage ourselves. And of course, the coup happened, the war happened, 2 coups and then a war and so on, which we eventually got out of in 1970. And of course, by then we were already under military rule. Military rule went on to 1979. We had another democratic experience. We tried it, but by 1983, December, that was over as well. And of course, we were back into military rule by 1984 up to 1999, which was quite an extended period. And so by the time we're coming back into this democracy, there was a lot of enthusiasm to say, hey, this has to stay. And even there was a sort of elite consensus to the extent that, look, this must work. And so they had a Democracy Day, which was May 29, which was the day that military handed over power in 1999 to the civilians. So it's been a bit tentative. So is it going to last? Is it not going to last? But it seems like this is the longest run we have had. However, there was this glitch in 1993 whereby a certain person, MKO Abiola, is said to have won the election, or believed to have won the election, but was not handed over to. This created a lot of problem in the Southwest, especially where he was from. Of course, there was a need to recognize that event, which President Buhari eventually did. And it was a brave move on his behalf and so on. So essentially, I think we should look away from the symbolism of democracy. Good for us. But hey, if every country is, or most other countries are run in democratic manner and we want to, what should be the most important thing is that democracy delivery for our people? Are our people better? Is the standard of living better and what have you?
Okay, Mr. Ali, now the idea about democracy is, government for the people, by the people, and of the people. Now, would you say that this particular idea is alive, well, and kicking at the moment?
Well, you see, it's not a yes or no answer. Is a democracy alive? The culture, is it been observed in Nigeria climb? You say yes, well, there is periodic election, but for election, it has to be free. Look at, it has to be participatory. Democracy has to, all the elements, they have to come together for democracy because it should be all inclusive. You get people should be given, even if it's an illusion of choice. But we've had this in the last 22 years. We've experimented, I think 23 years
23.
now, with this brand of democracy. Some people have argued, and rightly so, and I share some of the sentiments they express, that what we have is civilian rule, not actual democracy. It's civilization, they call it, not democracy. And the argument is this: look, from the word go, people are prime, there are people unless, for example, look at the awesome powers governors can have, governors have, and especially between 1999 to 2007. Some people will say, well, that was a transition from military rule to another semi-military rule under Obasanjo. We've had seen instances where people who have not even stood for election were so inaugurated in the National Assembly. We've seen an instance where someone who did not stand for election actually becoming number 3 citizen. It's there. I can even be specific. But you see, and that's why some people question how democratic is our own democratic experiment in the last couple of weeks. But by and large, you say, yes, there is a semblance, at least the military are in the barracks, and then people are given this illusion of choice. They can choose their own leaders. But you see, if I were to play the devil's advocate, more often than not, if you take every of the election that has happened in the last 23 years, especially beginning from 2007 till date, they've always been marred by so much irregularities. The 2007 election specifically was one of the worst we've had. Election, some people were declared winners before actually the votes were cast. It has happened. Even the beneficiary of that election, late Umar El-Adwal, at the presidential level I'm talking here, actually admitted that, look, the election that brought him to office was a bit marred by some irregularities. Overvoting, for example, stuffing of ballot, and then connivance by people who should ordinarily observe the best tenets of democracy. But then, so yes, democracy ideally is the government, like they say, defined of the people, by the people, and for the people. But unfortunately, it may, in Nigeria's experience, like my co-panelist said, the longest stretch we've had, 23 years now, you will say that so many things, there are some things that have been done in the breach. There are glitches, but then it's a work in progress. It's not an end to itself. It's a process. We've seen even advanced democracies where we have these occasional glitches where people also, in a way, beneficiaries of the system actually turn around to sabotage it.
Okay,
but by and large, you will say yes.
Let me go back to Dr. Fashua. And you ended your last intervention with a poser, and you asked if it is delivering to the people, if it is delivering result in tangible terms. What's your answers to this question that you posed yourself?
So, since I asked the question, I must answer it myself.
Exactly.
That's a good one. But well, it's a mixed bag. But I would probably think that the coming back of the politicians, sort of what we've seen is a scenario where most of them are basically about, taking care of themselves, expanding their own coasts and so on, grabbing more opportunities and, for themselves, many times in the name of the people. They call it my constituency. In the military era, what we had was a much leaner government, okay? A much leaner government, command and control, the governors were in charge of their states and, everybody fell into order, But what we've seen now is a scenario where Nigeria is now in debt, in serious debt, as a result of having to manage and carry all of this political baggage. It's incredible, the amount of money we spend maintaining our politicians. And oftentimes there's this idea that, okay, through the politicians, the people will benefit. We have a National Assembly. What do people do? They go there and argue all day, and at the end of the day, the people don't know exactly what's going on and so on. And we also have scenarios where you see that President Buhari delayed. In fact, he just appointed like TCN board recently, let's say a year to his departing. He refused to appoint boards for parastatals and so on because he felt that it was a waste, that these boards would just go there and just sit down and all. So it's a mixed bag. Of course, if you look at it, do you know that Nigeria's per capita income has almost remained the same for the past 20 years? That means that whereas the population is growing, but in terms of the GDP and the income of the country, it hasn't actually grown per se, commensurately with the growth in population. So, in fact, right now, as at 23 years ago, we were in the poorest country in the world in terms of human beings. Now we're dragging with India, in fact, but on a comparative basis, we are the country with the highest number of poor people in the world, and in terms of proportion as well. So it's a mixed bag. I'll say that democracy, though, has allowed people to be able to speak. And in speaking up and agitating, we probably have been able to bring a few ideas from abroad. For example, now everybody is on, using the GSM and so on. Under the military, people like David Mack felt that the phone was not for the poor, and nobody could challenge them. So perhaps if we still had military, everybody would still be living under that fear and not being able to speak out. However, we should also consider the fact that in a democratic regime since 23 years, this is not where we should be. I mean, your people interviewed someone in Gombe, and he was talking about the fact that now they have water, basic things like water. Now they have a university in Gombe State. But a university, should it be such a big achievement? In my view, I don't think so. Water, it's an indictment on both the military and the civilians that the little that Gombe could achieve is like water. Because again, we don't seem to be understanding just how fast the world is moving and how everybody is leaving us behind. One thing I've seen in all of this is that we are people who don't want to do things ourselves. We believe that we can import development, So over and above everything and the infrastructure we see, the development of the mind of the Nigerians has not accelerated as much as it should, whether under the military, they stand indicted, even though I think the cost of governance was lower, but even under the civilians as well, because we shouldn't still be talking about things like water and so on. Why have we been graduating people from universities when we cannot do our own water system? We have to bring the Israelis and so on. We can't do our own road. We have to bring the Germans. We can't do basically anything for ourselves, and that's where it is. So I think that there's a need for this kind of program to remind those who leave Nigeria just how slow we are delivering the goods to our people.
Okay, now, Doctor, earlier you talked about, the elites, amassing wealth for themselves. Now, can a society
the
politicians, yes. Now, can a society that has vast inequality between the poor and the rich still be called democratic?
Invariably, I think that, you see, the thing about democracy is, that when Churchill, it was who said that, democracy, all forms of government systems are bad, but democracy is the least bad, It's the one that people can manage, and everybody seems to be tending towards democracy. Even in monarchies, under monarchies like in the UAE, for example, they've tried to bring some voting for some of the sheikhs and so on, and so on. But so what that tells you is that if we had monarchy, we had military government, we had democratic government. Democratic government is meant to be the more intellectual of the lot, meaning that it's the one that should think in terms of more equality, sustainability of a society, what should work, So when you say that, look, that inequality should be a concern for a democratic government to say, we have to eradicate inequality. Like I said before, we have to invest in the minds of the people. That we shouldn't have, for example, so many children on the streets, not going to school. Under a democracy, it shouldn't happen. But I see that when you look at some of those things, they don't care. I had to quickly chip in that it's the politicians I meant. I mean, if you're an elite, you're in the private sector, in Dangote, you can't stop him from making his money. But if you are feeding on the country and the country is paying you, maybe through taxpayers' money or through natural resources, then I have an issue with you. In fact, Nigeria is one place that you see people go into office and they come out looking more robust and, rosy cheeks and all of that. Then you wonder how difficult this work is supposed to be. Because the real work of governance is a 24/7 work. People should not ordinarily, if they were doing that work well, to get 4 hours of sleep a day should be a problem. Especially in a country like ours, the problem never finishes. Where do we start? Is it insecurity? And someone did mention in the interview in Gombe State that, look, before democracy, we never had all these problems with terrorism. What could have happened? Either that the leaders did not understand that, look, they didn't look at where the society was falling apart until things went, a lot of it is economic in nature. People feeling disgruntled. Cattle herders having their cattle rustled and being left in the cold. I mean, Abdulaziz did some investigation on that recently, and nobody's speaking to that. Politicians not understanding their demographic and what is going on in their society until things blew out of proportion. Because indeed, we didn't have this security problem. So whether you're talking about security, you're talking about jobs,
education.
I've seen
sector.
that education. Look at jobs. A lot of our politicians are very reckless in their statement. They will tell you, the private sector will provide the job. And actually saying to them, the private sector did not campaign to the people. You, the politicians, campaign to the people. And the first responsibility of finding jobs for your people is with you, the politician. But of course, what you see is a scenario, they go there, we don't even know how much they're paying our members of National Assembly. We don't know how much we're paying our executive appointees. Democracy presupposes that some of those, information should be out in the open, and I hope we get there. But the time is fast running out, and you can see that society is almost buckling under so many pressures.
Well, Ali, if I come back to you quickly, if you look at, the Dr. Pashua painted a very solid picture of the Nigerian situation, a sort of a movement, a motion without movement. Why do you think is responsible for this state of the country?
Well, first, people routinely blame the nature of the transition itself. It was too short at the time. Power transited from the military, 9 months, most 11 months, and then the military, the party military. Well, at the time, the military had no choice but to depart, actually. The global trend suggested otherwise. To remain in office as a military regime, it was becoming increasingly not fashionable. So you see the horrid nature of that transition itself. And a lot of people never thought it was going to even endure. We've seen that happened in the ill-fated Third Republic, between when Babangida presided over the long, some people say, labyrinthine, hide-and-seek kind of thing, and then he reluctantly departed, with culminating in an annulment of election that today, the day of that election, has now become the symbol of democracy. And that's why we're even here pontificating what couldn't have happened. Now, so that glitch from the transition period threw up a lot of people who clearly, by their own nature, somebody said, look, it's important to understand that Africans generally, that democracy is a mindset, that African mindset is autocratic, is feudal, that it's a process that unless we assimilate it, understand it, we will have what we're having now, not just in Nigeria, but look around you. Ghana, I don't know, Ghana is trying to get it right. You understand? South Africa, given the nature of South Africa, how it fought apartheid, perhaps they're beginning to understand that. But in Nigeria, we still have the mindset of those who have superintended over the affairs, beginning with Obasanjo. Obasanjo made a public declaration that, look, to him, opposition means enmity, that he would have to crush his enemy And that's why under Obasanjo, the idea of even this gerontocrat presiding, and that's why he was referred to routinely as Baba. You look at Baba. When you approach, anytime my kids look at me, in my household, my kids call me Baba. Somewhere else, when they refer to Daddy, the mother will quickly question them. And even that idea, Daddy is more liberal. You understand? The thing that will come to you, Daddy is fond Dad, is fond Baba. But Baba is the African gerontocrat who sits atop and dispenses what is, yes, you understand? So this is the tragedy of the Nigerian democracy.
All right,
Yes.
sorry to cut you short, but just before we wrap up this discussion, President Buhari spoke to Nigerians, on the occasion of this year's Democracy Day. Let's watch.
On June 12, 1993, Nigerians saw the best in our citizens as we all went out to vote peacefully. By June 24, 1993, we also saw the worst of our leadership as the elections were annulled. We must never forget the sacrifices of the heroes of Nigeria's democracy during 1993. Their patriotism and peaceful struggle should guide our actions, especially when it comes to electing our leaders and holding them accountable now and in future. Fellow Nigerians, this is my last Democracy Day speech as your president. By June 12, 2023, exactly 1 year from today, you will already have a new president. I remain committed and determined to ensure that the new president is elected through a peaceful and transparent process. It is important for all of us to remember that June 12, 2023 will be exactly 30 years from 1993 presidential elections. In honor and memory of one of our national heroes for democracy, Chief MKO Abiola, GCFR, we must all work together to ensure this transition is done in a peaceful manner. I am hopeful that we can achieve this.
Okay, so just before we wrap up, let's start with Doctor. Can you share your thoughts on what the president said, like the final thoughts?
Well, I mean, he said all the right things, He went back to the first question he asked on this set today about the significance of the moment, the significance of democracy and Democracy Day. He went on a kind of historical excursion about what happened, where we're coming from, especially since 1993. And also he made a very significant, comment that this is going to be his last address to us on a Democracy Day, meaning that, the gentleman was also going to rest, in his ranch and what have you. So it is what it is. I think that no matter what, the last thing I'd like to say is no matter what circumstance we find ourselves, we should understand that this entity called Nigeria, okay, is sustainable, can be sustained, and can do a whole lot better. And this is one message I'm trying to put across, especially to the look, in youth, there's anger, okay? It's justified. Passion is the sin of youth, okay? Pride is the sin of middle age, and prejudice is the sin of old age. But the young people should understand that they have a lot more years to live than the older people, on the average. And therefore, they should, rather than everywhere I turn, you see the young people running down this country for one excuse or the other. Oh, this is a good time to break up the country if things don't go your way. And looking for Tinder moments where they can rush in the streets and people are burning things and destroying the same infrastructure that's not enough. So no matter what has happened, I think we need to connect with these younger people, Nigerians, and let them know that there could be hope, there is hope, and in fact, that they are the hope. I think that should be the message for the moment. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ali, let's have your final thoughts.
Well, what I pick in all of this is about the promise to have a free and credible election. Well, let's just hope so, because if the processes that drew up the party chairman of the ruling APC and eventually even the presidential flag bearer, if the idea of consensus, and then juxtapose that with what the president at a point told the northern governor, APC governor, that he should be allowed to name his successor. I think we should be very vigilant, really. I'm playing the devil's advocate here, because if the APC, the consensus thing about APC, will it give other Nigerians a level playing field, other contenders with the presidential election? So, having said all of that, you can see that the president is anxious to go home and rest, like my colleague here on the discussion said. The man is clearly tired. You could see that it was with an effort he was reading that, and hopefully by June 12 next year, 2023, he will be referred to as the former president. Already he's lame duck. He's an outgoing president. So some Nigerians will say, well, about time.
Thank you very much, Ali M. Ali, Deputy President of the Nigerian Guild of Editors and a member of the Daily Trust Editorial Board, Dr. Tope Pashua. We hope to have you another time on the show.